I know there are a number of financial brand leaders who feel like they've been hit by an AI avalanche, particularly coming out of the COVID chaos. And I've had some conversations with CEOs, with executives. I've been on the road speaking, and a good number of them, they're tired. They're tired. They're overwhelmed from all of the changes that they've had to deal with going back to early 2020. I said this, back then, early podcast, that this is going to be a decade of exponential change. Not even really kind of thinking about AI at the moment. It was more of a COVID perspective. And many are just trying to keep their heads above water. Their perspective, though, I think, of the future is directly and will directly impact and influence how they think and make decisions now here in the present moment. So thinking about this pace of exponential change and some of the perspective that you just shared, that it might not be financial services related directly, it will indirectly impact this vertical. How can financial brand leaders keep up with all of the change going on right now in this age of AI?
Sure. So I guess I'll take that question and break it into two pieces.
Sure.
One is how do you keep up informationally? And then two is how do you actually keep up in terms of ability to cope as an organization and to adapt. Um, the answer to the first one, I think, hasn't changed substantially. AI is a wonderful set of tools for data summary. I have lots of articles that cross my email or desk in some form or fashion. And the ones that are longer and don't need precise detail, I will absolutely feed through large language models to get a summary. There's free tools to do that with YouTube videos. There are many options, many of them free even, to help process more data more quickly. And that's, SRM is a relatively small company. I'm sure that this is a much more refined pipeline at other places where it's, automatic data scraping of news articles, improved summarization, and like those sort of pipeline tools have existed for a long time, longer than these AI sort of new capabilities. But now, like I was talking about earlier, it's more accessible, it's cheaper, it's easier, it's better. And so there are absolutely tools to help sort of ingest more information sooner. And I think as always with this, you need to understand your priorities. So having a strong strategy and knowing how are you planning to win in your space, what matters to your customers or members, uh, how are you going to compete into the future? It helps to guide and bring that fire hose of information down to a more manageable level.
Yeah.
It is important, I think, to still sometimes go outside of that typical lane that's where you see some really exciting innovations or where you see surprising solutions to problems sometimes. But for the day-to-day keeping up, I think that's what I would recommend. As far as adaptation, the other half of this, something I talk about a lot with executives is change agility. So, as you said, change is exponential. Things are getting faster and faster. There's the classic kind of Moore's law of computing that's been taken and applied a whole bunch of other places as far as like just the pace of change and even looking at AI particularly, um, we in computing in general, we went from mechanical computing to programming. That was 1900 to 1950, 50 years or so. We got into more of the digital era in like 30 or so years. We entered the sort of early cognitive era in the 2000s, and 2020 we're having this like AI explosion, right? Going from uh, mechanical tools to digital and like increasing levels of automation and uh, more and more kind of built on top of each other and making new things possible and moving faster and faster. And so this is just a fact of life now. There are going to continue to be lots of new innovations, lots of things coming down the pipeline, and you need really strong strategy, like I said, to help decide what's important, what's not, what do you need to focus on, and what's a threat.
Mm.
Having solid horizon scanning is important to keep an eye on that and understand where and when and how things are hitting your industry. And really structuring your organization to be able to deliver on change, right? So if you don't have a good learning and development group and program, to help upskill people, to help them adjust to changes to policies. If you don't have solid internal communications, right, to let people know, uh, hey, there are these large language models out here, but by the way, if you put any proprietary data, it can end up in a public training data set for this set of tools. You know, here are things you need to know about new types of fraud. And that's not just a technological capability, that's a culture thing. You have to balance the overall sort of workload of people so that they have enough room. You have the right volume of communication, you have the right channels. You don't have too much that's duplicative. People aren't so overloaded that they don't pay attention to any of it. There's a lot of like fine tuning to get that right. And then having a solid business transformation function, right, to actually deliver on projects. So projects are more and more important. We often see uh, clients not paying enough attention to sort of enterprise transformation in terms of where does it sit, what power does it have, how closely do we curate and trim our portfolio of projects? Is it all stuff that's pushed by vendors? Where are our dependencies? It goes pretty deep. I won't go down to the bottom level. I'm sure folks don't need all of that, but there's a lot of work that can be done to improve how good your organization is at managing change. And as our environment speeds up, that becomes one of the most important things competitively. Institutions that can adapt will survive, and ones that can't will slowly become irrelevant.
That's a great point, and one that I've been thinking a lot about. I've been working on my second book, Banking on Change, and the subtitle is How to Achieve Exponential Growth in the Age of AI. The book has nothing to do about AI per se. It's how do we focus on human transformation in the context of AI, because we think about the studies of digital transformation historically. It depends upon who you're reading, but they're all saying the same thing. 60 to 85% of digital transformation projects fail or fail to meet expectations, and it's not because of the technology; it's the human element. And so when we look at AQ, is something that we can measure, AQ being adaptability quotient. And like EQ, AQ can be measured, it can be trained, it can be expanded. I've often worked with leaders and said, you want to increase your AQ right now? They're like, yeah. Take a cold shower for 7 days and see how your mind not reacts but responds to environmental changes. And it's funny because many don't take up the challenge because they're comfortable. They're stuck in the cave of complacency. They're comfortable with what they know. And I think that's the other thing too. Perspective shapes reality. When working with financial brand leaders, and we've been having these conversations about AI, particularly Chat GPT, because it's just kind of a hot topic. Like I look at this very objectively, and I hold no judgment, and I say, well, what's your perspective of Chat GPT? Like, oh, well, that's what kids are going to use to cheat on at school. And I go, really? Why do you feel that way? Why do you believe that way? Well, that's what I've been hearing. That's what I've been seeing on the news. And so I think back to the other point you're making, education is critical here. And we have done some research studies that have found that around 70 to 80% of financial brand leaders invest 1 to 2 hours or less per week in ongoing learning and development. But when we look at some of the secondary market research, coming out of like Microsoft and Google, they're like, no, we need to be investing 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week in ongoing learning. And I think there's just this conflict here. So I'm curious when it comes to AI and in this world of large language models, and you share some really good examples of how you're feeding articles and even YouTube videos to get summaries. I think of what Peter Diamandis is doing with a platform called Future Loop that I'm subscribed to. I get summaries of what's going on, and it gives me the kind of the horizon without having to get too deep, but to kind of get the larger picture. When it comes to AI and large language models, what's a misconception, a common misconception that you're hearing financial brand leaders talk about, but you have a different perspective on based upon your knowledge of the world?
Sure. I think that it's largely a lot of what you said around kind of they've seen it for one domain, or maybe they spent 10 minutes back in November playing around with ChatGPT
Hmm.
and have a sense of maybe what it can do, or they've tried a few things with it, but they really don't have a good sense of holistically exactly how much it underpins in terms of new capabilities and all the different domains which this is driving forward. As well as having, I think there's also misconceptions around thinking that it's just a chat bot, for example, or it's more like the old generation of intent-based chat bots that folks may be familiar with that have replaced been replacing IVRs kind of slowly over time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think it's important to kind of connect the dots here to see that, yeah, large language models are driving changes to content generation of basically every type. It's video, it's text, it's audio, it's video editing and replacement of doing like video effects editing, having virtual actors. It's voice synthesis, both for customer service and on the negative side for fraud and cyber threat. It's accelerating development. It's fueling a disruption to art and content creation. And so there's this common sort of I would say there's a level of understanding that you get from seeing how these things connect, that helps you to make better decisions, make better use of these tools. And that's something that we actually advocate for pretty often. It's hard to know what to do with this space with as much as is going on. Um, but given how much of our just existing technologies, our loan processing and origination systems, our marketing apps, right? Anything that we're using for content review, generation, scheduling. Um, Most of those solutions, if they aren't using AI and specifically the sort of large language model infrastructure in some form already, they're likely to be doing that in the future. And so there are common, strengths, weaknesses, quirks, understanding to kind of get the most out of these tools that can help across a lot of different domains. And so we, in the sort of noise that we see in the space right now, often what we recommend is get better at change, right? As just something that very often needs to happen, and particularly like get your people starting to learn and experiment with large language models in a safe context. So have an AI policy, do training on large language models specifically, because there's a lot of low hanging fruit today for FIs, and particularly for marketing and copywriting. I imagine a lot of folks are already using large language models for content generation, but doing so in a way that is compliant, that's safe, both with regulations and with your brand standards to keep your reputation safe. And having your employees starting to learn these tools and become experienced and understand this is what they're good for, this is what they're bad for, these are the pitfalls, will help a lot in the future, as so many more things have some level of this architecture baked into them. So even if you don't know what AI product or products you're ultimately going to be using, there's an absolute storm of them right now, and that's likely to continue for the next while. Having some experience with this and making sure that experience is being gained in a safe way can only really benefit you in the future.
That's a great point. It's almost kind of like going back to being a curious kindergartner, or taking the Socratic approach to I know nothing, and then just getting out, playing, experimenting, and learning, and looking at the world through a lens of curiosity. You're talking about some of the content. There's Jasper, there's copy.ai. Even I facilitate a workshop about building a website that sells, and how that what I'm teaching, exploring the use of Midjourney as a creative capability for UI and for UX. It opens up a whole new world. But it was interesting. I was working with a group of marketers recently, and I asked everyone in the room, and there's a couple hundred. I said, would you raise your hand if you have at least just tried, we'll just say Chat GPT or any type of generative AI capability? And everyone raises their hand for the most part. How many are using it on a weekly basis. I would say 70% of the hands go down. How many of you are using it on a daily basis? Maybe 5% of people had their hands left up. And I think, and I'm like, well, why? And maybe it's the fact that we have to rewire our own minds to think through this new context that AI capabilities and large language models, it's another teammate. It's someone that I can collaborate with to co-create. And it's just a different way of thinking, which leads to a different way of doing. But what I've found is that sometimes to bridge the gap between the thinking and the doing comes down to the feeling. It's like I got to feel like I'm confident in this capability. And so either the capability of the AI or the capability of myself, which where, I think we can talk a lot about growth opportunities and potential here from different lenses.